This is a picture of 300 soldiers receiving comprehensive AIDS education in India for the very first time. Today is World AIDS Day, and although we've made great strides and efforts over the last 30 years and accomplished so much, situations like this, scenarios like this, are not happening enough and often enough. And it's because there are so many challenges associated with providing AIDS education in places like India and in other places around the world. So today, I'd like to tell you a little bit about those challenges, ways to overcome them, tell you about the story behind this picture, and a few other stories. 33 million people around the world have HIV and AIDS, and 90% of them are living outside of North America and Europe. The challenges associated with HIV education are great, but it turns out that these challenges actually vary significantly from country to country. It was in 2005 that I was reading reports coming out of India that said it was the next hot zone. It was going to be the next hot zone for people living with HIV, and that despite millions of dollars poured into HIV-related campaigns, that the knowledge levels were still really low. And I wanted to know why this was happening. And it turns out one of the biggest problems was that the link between awareness campaigns and knowledge gains was, and actually still is, broken. So talking about AIDS education means talking about sex, intravenous drug use, death, and other topics like this which are considered taboo in different parts of the world. So unlike, say, smoking campaigns, anti-smoking campaigns, an increase in awareness does not lead necessarily to an increase in knowledge. So despite providing millions of dollars in HIV-related AIDS education, it didn't mean that people were actually learning. In fact, it's extremely difficult to give AIDS education around the world. And this is an example of that. These are demonstrators burning sex and AIDS education materials in Uttar Pradesh, which is one of the largest states in India. And the people doing the burning are the teachers themselves who were asked to provide this education in the schools. In India, sex education was banned in multiple states across the country. And since AIDS education was taught as part of sex education, it was either banned, it was either watered down or not given. And so it was extremely difficult to provide this kind of information. And even in places where it hadn't been explicitly banned, like in this picture, as you can see, parents and educators were strongly against it in certain cases, which made it extremely difficult. So when we were conducting our research, what we found were the same results that I had read about in these reports and in the different newspapers, which was that just the basic understanding of HIV, how does transmission work, that wasn't there. So people had questions about, could you get it from coughing or sneezing or just touching? And it was incredible to go through these reports. In fact, there were peer educators who themselves were supposed to be giving this education who had answered questions incorrectly. And yet the anonymous surveys were just filled with questions. And the number one question that was asked was, is there a cure? So, could we reimagine the way that we're teaching this kind of information? And the answer is yes. My research had begun 5 years ago when we were trying to think about alternate ways to teach about taboo topics. Is there a way to teach about it which bypasses these barriers and accomplishes what we need, which is knowledge gain? And what we found was the place that I wanted to start was looking at the balance between comfort and clarity. So if you look at this image behind me, on the right bottom side you see these stick figures, which are extremely comfortable to look at, but it's totally unclear what's happening in this picture. And this other extreme over here with the explicit images, those are more like medical illustrations. And in a lot of places, those were actually banned or they're deemed immoral. And so we couldn't actually use pictures like that. So the question was, What kind of pictures do we use that maximize comfort as well as clarity and therefore optimize learning? And here's what we came up with. When we looked at a number of other images, we wanted to see how comfortable people were with the current images that were being used. And the numbers here are actually how uncomfortable people were. It actually turned out that a number of the pictures that were being used were derived from medical illustrations from North America, which ended up being completely unsuitable in these different cultures. And so what we ended up doing was actually a few steps away from what was accomplishing learning. And this was through rigorous research. So here are a few examples. For instance here, the main problem was that there was too much of the woman's skin which was exposed. So instead, through animation, we could actually show a pregnant woman who through animation would have a baby in her arms. Or here, we actually borrowed a number of things from old Bollywood movies. And so we couldn't show a couple kissing, but we could actually show a couple coming very close to kissing, and then the camera pans up the tree and these birds kiss instead. And as a result, what we found was that over 98% of the people who went through the materials were extremely comfortable. In fact, one of our advisors at Stanford was saying that this is in Disney territory, which was extremely important since we're providing education about a sensitive topic. So then what happened was I started putting this research up online, and I started receiving messages from people all over the world. NGOs, governments, individuals, institutions writing and saying, you know what, we have this same problem in our country too. Can you help us? And so we started to use the same methodology and the same research to test in these different countries, and we found the exact same results. It was extremely difficult to teach comprehensive AIDS education because of the stigma and other taboos associated with it. And so we actually went through quite a bit of more research, 5 years of research, and hundreds of iterations before we were able to put up the first pilot versions online. And after we did that, we ran some pretty rigorous studies through Stanford. And what we found was extremely exciting, which was that there were dramatic gains in learning and retention, and that these materials outperformed any other materials that were in these different countries. 2 years ago, I started a nonprofit based on this approach to be able to develop these kinds of materials and disseminate them around the world for free. Today, the materials are being used in over 50 countries around the world, and these are some of the stories that we receive. Meet Dr. Paswal. He is a doctor in the Indian Army, and he wrote to us after finding the materials online and said, I would like to get this to my soldiers, but I don't know very much about technology. Can you help me? And he said, we don't have any internet access in our army camps. So I said, that's no problem. We'll send you our CD-ROMs. And so that's what we did. We sent them to him. And soon after, he sent us pictures like this. And that's the initial picture I was showing you with 300 soldiers in the room. But the story actually didn't end here. There were a number of educators in the neighboring communities that found out about what he was doing, and they came to him and said, can you help us? So then he started sending us pictures like this. And so instead of the soldiers, it's still Dr. Paswal with the same software in the same room, but now we've got hundreds and hundreds of children learning about HIV, comprehensive AIDS education for the very first time. This is another one of my favorite stories. It's a story from Kenya where a group is actually taking the software around to areas that has no electricity. And this is how they're doing it. They're putting the laptop on a chair and the chair on a table and the table in front of the room for all of these kids to learn at the same time. And they're actually taking this to over 1,000 kids in 20 schools. Last year, we had a tremendous victory in India. The TeachAIDS materials were formally approved by a number of the state governments that had actually banned sex education. And as a result of these rolling approvals, we were able to recruit a number of celebrities to donate their voices in the animations. And the result has been incredibly exciting. For instance, in Andhra Pradesh, a state of 84 million people, just a few years ago, HIV-positive children were expelled from schools. But this year, they not only approved the TeachAIDS software, but they have already distributed 25,000 copies across all of their schools and their counseling centers. In fact, today, they are on World AIDS Day. They're playing the TeachAIDS animations on one of their most popular television stations. In Botswana, we've also had some success. It's a country where 23% of the population is infected with HIV. But with the help of their former president, Festus Mogae, and our partners there, we were able to recruit a number of celebrities to donate their voices as well. And today, again on World AIDS Day, they are launching the TeachAIDS animations nationally to be implemented into every single school across the entire country. So these are just a few of the hundreds of stories that we receive that keeps us going and keeps our momentum going. But I'd like to leave you with this. There are still millions of people around the world who don't have access to basic AIDS education. But it doesn't have to be this way. We know what to do, and together we can bring this kind of education to people all over the world. Thank you.